The creepy cult. As I pulled up to the address in the seemingly ordinary suburban neighborhood, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The houses all looked the same: neat lawns, well-kept gardens, but there was an eerie stillness in the air, a sense of unease that prickled at the back of my neck. I brushed aside my misgivings, chalking them up to nerves, and grabbed the food delivery bag from the passenger seat. The promise of a generous tip was too tempting to pass up, especially with bills piling up and rent overdue. Approaching the front door, I knocked hesitantly, the sound echoing through the silent street. For a moment, there was no response, and I wondered if perhaps the order had been a mistake. But then, just as I was about to turn away, the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. "Delivery for," I began, trailing off as I took in the scene before me. The hallway was adorned with strange symbols and sigils, the air heavy with the scent of incense, and something else, something metallic and cloying. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw figures moving in the shadows, their movements slow and deliberate. "Come in," a voice whispered from somewhere within the darkness. My heart pounding in my chest, I stepped over the threshold, the door shutting behind me with a heavy thud. Panic surged through me as I realized I was trapped, surrounded by the eerie silence of the cult's hideout. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw them hooded figures clad in robes of deepest black, their faces obscured by shadow. They moved with a sense of purpose, their voices raised in a haunting chant that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to make sense of what I was seeing, but it was like a nightmare come to life, a twisted tableau of forbidden rituals and dark ceremonies. And at the center of it all stood a grotesque altar, adorned with offerings of food and drink. Realization dawned on me with sickening clarity. This wasn't just a delivery gone wrong, it was something far more sinister. I had stumbled upon a cult, a group of fanatics willing to do anything to appease their dark deity. Desperation clawed at my throat as I searched for a way out, but the cultists had me surrounded, their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly fervor. I was trapped, a lamb led to slaughter in this house of horrors. But even as fear threatened to consume me, a spark of defiance ignited within me. I refused to go down without a fight, to become another sacrifice on the altar of their twisted beliefs. With newfound resolve, I crept through the shadows, careful to avoid detection as I sought out a means of escape. The cultists were too engrossed in their rituals to notice my movements, their chants rising to a fever pitch as they offered their twisted prayers to their dark deity. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found it a small window, barely large enough to squeeze through, but my only chance at freedom. With trembling hands, I pushed it open, the cold night air rushing in to meet me like a breath of salvation. But as I prepared to make my escape, a voice echoed through the darkness, freezing me in place. "Where do you think you're going?" it hissed, sending a chill down my spine. I turned to see the leader of the cult, their eyes ablaze with unholy fervor as they advanced towards me, a sacrificial dagger clutched in their hand. There was no time to hesitate. With a primal scream, I hurled myself through the window, the glass shattering around me as I tumbled out into the night. Pain exploded through my body as I hit the ground, but I pushed through it, scrambling to my feet and running as if the hounds of hell were at my heels. Behind me, I could hear the cultists' cries of rage and despair, their twisted chants fading into the distance as I put as much distance between myself and that accursed house as possible. As I stumbled out onto the deserted street, I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath and shaking with adrenaline. But even as I lay there, battered and broken, I knew that I had escaped a fate worse than death, a fate that would have seen me consumed by the darkness that lurked within those walls. And as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I vowed never to forget the horrors I had witnessed, nor the narrowness of my escape from the clutches of that twisted cult. For in that suburban neighborhood, hidden behind a facade of normalcy, there lurked a darkness more profound than any I had ever known, a darkness that hungered for souls and would stop at nothing to claim them for its own. As I lay there, my breath ragged and my heart still pounding in my chest, I knew I couldn't stay in the open for long. The cult would surely come looking for me, their fanatical devotion driving them to pursue me to the ends of the earth if necessary. Pushing myself to my feet, I stumbled down the deserted street, my mind racing with fear and desperation. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking threat, every rustle of leaves sending a fresh wave of terror coursing through me. But despite the overwhelming sense of dread that threatened to consume me, I forced myself to keep moving, to put as much distance between myself and that accursed house as possible. I couldn't afford to let fear paralyze me, not when my life hung in the balance. As I wandered the empty streets, the first light of dawn casting long shadows across the pavement, I felt a sense of profound isolation settle over me. It was as if the world had shifted, leaving me stranded in a nightmare from which there was no waking. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm me, a glimmer of hope flickered in the darkness. A distant streetlight, a passing car, a sign that I was not entirely alone in this forsaken place. Gathering my strength, I pressed on, my footsteps echoing in the silence as I searched for some semblance of safety in this hostile landscape. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a convenience store, its neon sign flickering weakly in the growing light of dawn. Relief flooded through me as I pushed open the door, the familiar scent of stale coffee and packaged snacks washing over me like a bomb. The cashier looked up from behind the counter, their eyes widening in surprise at the sight of me, disheveled, blooded, but alive. "Are you okay?" they asked, their voice tinged with concern. I tried to speak, to explain the horrors I had witnessed, but the words caught in my throat, choked off by the weight of my trauma. Instead, I simply nodded, grateful for the fleeting sense of safety that surrounded me. As I stood there, catching my breath and trying to make sense of the nightmare that had engulfed me, I realized that I couldn't simply forget what had happened. The cult was still out there, still lurking in the shadows, waiting to ensnare unsuspecting victims in their web of darkness. But even as fear threatened to consume me once more, I knew that I couldn't let it control me, not if I wanted to survive. With a newfound sense of determination, I vowed to do whatever it took to expose the cult's twisted machinations, to ensure that no one else would fall prey to their depravity. And as I stepped back out into the light of day, the first rays of dawn painting the sky hues of pink and gold, I knew that my journey was far from over. But with each step I took, I would be moving forward, not away from the darkness, but through it, towards the light of truth and justice that awaited me on the other side. As I navigated the winding road that led to the remote, dilapidated mansion on the outskirts of town, a sense of foreboding settled over me like a heavy shroud. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. I approached the looming structure that stood before me. The mansion was a relic of another time, its once grand facade now weathered and worn, its windows dark and foreboding. As I stepped out of my car, the chill of the night air sent a shiver down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Gathering my courage, I grabbed the food delivery bag from the passenger seat and made my way up the crumbling steps to the front door. The wood was warped and splintered, and as I reached out to knock, it creaked ominously beneath my touch. For a moment, there was no response, and I wondered if perhaps the order had been a mistake. But just as I was about to turn away, the door swung open with a loud groan, revealing a dimly lit interior. Flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning beneath my weight. The mansion was a maze of twisting corridors and hidden passages, each one seemingly darker and more menacing than the last. As I made my way deeper into the heart of the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being led further and further into a trap. And then I heard it, the faintest whisper of voices, echoing through the darkness like the siren song of the damned. I froze in place, my breath catching in my throat as I strained to listen. The voices grew louder, filling the air with their mournful lamentations. They spoke of betrayal and loss, of anger and vengeance, and as their words washed over me, I felt a chill settle in my bones. But before I could retreat, a figure materialized before me, a spectre draped in tattered robes, its eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. It reached out a spectral hand, its fingers curling into claws as it advanced towards me with a haunting wail. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized I was face to face with one of the mansion's vengeful spirits. There was no escape, no way out of this nightmare that had swallowed me whole. With a surge of desperation, I turned and fled, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls as I raced towards the nearest exit. But no matter how fast I ran, the ghosts pursued me, their anguished cries growing louder with each passing moment. As I reached the front door, I threw it open and stumbled out into the night, the cold air biting at my skin. I gasped for breath. But even as I fled into the darkness, I knew that the horrors of the mansion would haunt me forever, a reminder of the sinister appetite that lurked within its walls. As I sprinted away from the mansion, my heart pounding and my breath ragged, I realized that I couldn't simply leave the delivery unfinished. The thought of facing the wrath of my employer for a failing to complete the task spurred me on, despite the terror that still gripped me. With trembling hands, I retrieved my phone from my pocket and checked the delivery app. To my horror, I saw that the order was still marked as pending, the customer likely waiting impatiently for their meal to arrive. I couldn't abandon my duty, not when the consequences could be so dire. Steeling myself against the fear that threatened to overwhelm me, I turned back towards the mansion, determination burning in my veins. As I approached the front door once more, I braced myself for the onslaught of ghostly apparitions that awaited me inside. But to my surprise, the house was silent, the whispers that had haunted me before now eerily absent. Cautiously, I stepped inside, the weight of the delivery bag heavy on my shoulder. The mansion seemed different now, quieter, almost peaceful, but I knew better than to let my guard down. With each step I took, I felt the eyes of the spirits upon me, their presence palpable in the air. But I refused to be intimidated. I had a job to do, and I wouldn't let anything stand in my way. Navigating the maze-like corridors of the mansion, I finally reached the room where the delivery was to be made. The air grew colder as I approached, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Summoning every ounce of courage I possessed, I knocked on the door, the sound echoing through the empty room. For a moment, there was no response, and I feared that the customer had left or worse, that they were another phantom waiting to ensnare me. But then, just as I was about to leave, the door creaked open, revealing a figure standing in the darkness. Relief flooded through me as I saw that it was a living, breathing person, a woman, her face drawn and pale, but unmistakably human. "I have your delivery," I said, my voice trembling slightly. The woman nodded, her eyes darting nervously around the room, if she expected something or someone to leap out at any moment. With trembling hands, she took the food from me, her fingers brushing mine in a fleeting touch. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could speak, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the lone candle that flickered on the table. In the darkness, I heard a chorus of voices, the same whispers that had haunted me before, now louder and more insistent than ever. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I realized that the spirits of the mansion were not done with us yet. They hungered for more than just revenge, they hungered for our souls. Grabbing the woman's hand, I pulled her towards the door, my heart racing as I urged her to run. But even as we fled into the night, I knew that the spirits would not rest until they had claimed their prize. As we emerged from the mansion's shadowy embrace, I glanced back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the ghosts looming in the doorway. But the mansion stood silent and still, its secrets hidden once more behind its crumbling walls. As we made our way back to civilization, the woman clung to my arm, her eyes wide with fear. But despite the terror that still gripped us, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We had escaped the mansion's clutches, and for now, that was enough. But as I looked back one last time at the haunted mansion looming in the distance, I knew that our ordeal was far from over. The spirits of the mansion would always be waiting, hungry for their next victim, their sinister appetite never truly satisfied.